I can't draw or paint, but this is my creativity, I guess,
Mhm.
is looking at a situation and then being able to say, okay, if we do this, this, and this might work.
The Neurofeed podcast. How is clinical neurofeedback transforming lives? We talk with therapists, researchers, and home users. From the intersection of neuroscience and therapy, these interviews tell stories of discovery, empowerment, and learning to thrive. Our guest today is Leigh Povia. Leigh is a New Jersey licensed clinical social worker, a registered play therapist, an approved EMDR consultant, and a board-certified neurofeedback provider. Having worked with children and families, youth in crisis, students in special education, and children with pervasive developmental disorder, Leigh has taught play therapy and graduate courses in social work at Rutgers University and continues to mentor clinicians in EMDR and neurofeedback.
Like, see right here,
Yeah.
there are two vases that I bought because they look like neural pathways.
Oh,
I'll show
that's
you.
really cool.
Anyway, that's how it's affected my life. I look at brainwaves all the time. It's ridiculous.
A good starting place, I think, is when you're talking to people who don't really know that much about neurofeedback. How do you describe it?
Hmm.
Like prospective clients.
Right. So typically I'll tell them, I'll give them a little bit of an introduction to the arousal model. And I'll explain, sometimes we have too much slow frequency in our brains, and I sort of, make it exaggerated. And we need to ramp that up. Or sometimes we have way too much fast frequency in our brain. We need to calm that down. And our brain doesn't naturally know how to do that. So we can teach the brain how to do that, just like we can teach someone how to recognize when their heart's beating too fast, or when they're breathing too shallow, or to not taking deep breaths, right? Or too fast. So we can teach the brain how to either ramp up the too much slow frequency or calm down the too much fast frequency. And we do that with a loosely termed video game. And I'm very quick to explain that it's not like, PS3 or whatever version there is out there now. I don't even know. But, or Call of Duty, it's not going to be like that. They're simple games, and they're pretty mild and honestly sometimes boring. So, so there's that. But we are teaching you to actually control your brain, which is a really cool concept, I think. So I typically start to talk about that, and I'll talk about why it's particularly important for that particular client based on the behaviors that I'm seeing. So I don't know, did that answer your question? Does that? And then sometimes I'll also talk about, sometimes people have a hard time maintaining just even a steady state. And so, and I'm Italian and I'm from Jersey, so you get a lot of hand gestures. So they have a hard time holding a steady state. And when that happens, we need to regulate it so that it can operate more efficiently, more smoothly. And they seem to get that. At some level, they seem to get that. They don't necessarily always care or want to know about which frequency or which sensor placement, or, I do talk to them about that, but typically clients don't necessarily care about that. They just say, make me feel better.
Leigh, being also an attachment-based clinician, how much do you feel like your relationship with the client plays into either, allowing them to try this new thing, or even what kind of outcomes you can get?
Well, they're not going to try it if they don't trust me. And if they have a hard time building a relationship, I Actually, sometimes that works well for neurofeedback. Let me explain. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I need to have the relationship first. So if building a relationship is scary for someone, sometimes it is the idea of neurofeedback, which doesn't require a lot of talking, unless you're in the room with me and then I'm chatting the whole time, and some clients are irritated by that. But I generally only do that when they need to be more comfortable with that kind of environment. But you don't have, it doesn't require a lot of like deep, dark insight, at least on the surface, right? And so sometimes that's more appealing to folks who have trouble attaching or who have trouble in relationship or relating to others. On the other hand, you also have other clients who, if they're not able to trust you yet, or if they're not able to trust the relationship yet, they're not going to trust that, hey, here, willy-nilly, play with my brain. Like, that's not going to happen. So it really depends on the client, and it depends on sort of how I'm sort of sussing out the situation as it's playing out.
That's really helpful. I like how you explain it.
Oh, thanks.
If I can ask, what led you to get into neurofeedback?
Oh,
Way back in the day.
ah, Leanne, you're killing me. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so that's actually a pretty great story. So it's and it's kind of sad too. So get ready for get your tissues. Fantastic. So way back in the day, so I've been an attachment therapist for a long time. I trained in play therapy. I trained in EMDR. I trained in dyadic developmental psychotherapy. And so I sort of made this name for myself working with kids with reactive attachment disorder. I don't really use that term much anymore, but back then I did.
Trauma.
Yeah. Right. So I had created this name for myself, and I had gotten this referral from a local hospital-based program that was doing an IOP level of care for a kid. And that kid at the time was 14, and she was coming to see me, and every placement, every foster care placement got disrupted. And it broke my heart. Like, I remember coming home one day and I had to help a parent tell her that they weren't going to adopt her. And I held it together in that session, and then I came home and I just curled into my husband's lap and sobbed and sobbed. And so I consulted with amazing therapists, well-known, like superstars, in play therapy, in EMDR, in DDP. Like, I was consulting everyone with any kind of that I believed had any kind of ability to teach me. Yeah. And they were expert. Like, they were big names to sort of help this kid. And one of my mentors, her name is 𝘲𝗏𝗏 𝙁𝙯. She had a program in Lancaster that included many of these models of therapy, including neurofeedback. And so I would often go to her and I'm like, 𝘲𝗏, I don't know what to do. She's not getting better. And there was one day, a couple things. There was one day, I think it was her, she said to me, well, but she doesn't have a mother. You're with her one day a week. She doesn't have a mother. You can't replace that. So that was one. And then the other thing, the whole time she kept saying to me, she needs neurofeedback. She needs neurofeedback. She needs neurofeedback. And I kept saying, that's great, but there's no one that does it.
Yep.
around me. And I reached out to, there's one person locally that did it. I reached out to him and he didn't respond to me. So like, well, damn, I have to go do it.
Now I got to do it myself, I guess.
Yeah. And so I happened on Ed Hamlin's class because it was on the East Coast.
Serendipitous.
Very serendipitous. I do think the moon and stars align for me in different capacities, and that was one of them. And so I took the class, and he said he did the research with the Eastern European adoptees. And I was like, I need to know you.
Whatever this is, that's what I'm doing.
We're sticking together. And so I harassed him a bit to take me on as a mentee.
That's how Ed works. If you don't harass him, you know, he's too good.
Yeah, I know. And so so for 7 years, I spent every other week for an hour with Ed, going over mini maps, talking about clients, talking about cases. And I'll never forget the day that for this kid, we did, I don't remember what it was called, but it was the first default mode network protocol that they had sort of created, where it was FCZ, CPZ, and then linked years. And I had all these like Y chord and all sorts of stuff. And I trained her for maybe 6 minutes, and she said to me, I have never in my life felt this calm.
Pretty awesome.
It was pretty awesome. That was after, trying to do what neurofeedback can do with yoga, and I'm terrible at yoga, so I just ended up pushing her over in the session. So it was a much better approach. But yeah, no. And so for that particular kid, I ended up being the only consistent adult in her life for about 5 years, from age 14 to 19. So she is the reason why I started neurofeedback under duress. But I did it, and now I honestly can't imagine practicing without it.
I know. I feel the same way. We tried in the pandemic, and I learned home use instead of giving it up.
Oh,
because I couldn't do it.
I just went back into the office.
No, I did that after 6 months too. Yeah.
So, yeah. So that was so she was the reason that I started. I said it was sad, and it's funny you bring up the pandemic. Unfortunately, that particular kid passed away on the day I found out the day that I got my first shot for COVID, the first vaccine. So
sad.
Right. It is very sad. But she has had an amazing impact on and she would not, I don't know that she knew this while she was alive, but she has had an amazing impact on my career and so many kids moving forward.
Right.
So.
Well, it's a good legacy for her to leave behind, even though she's not with us anymore. There's a lot of, when you work with adopted kids, there's a lot of, or kids who have had RAD or developmental trauma, you can see such the wonderful person underneath, and it's so hard looking at a brain that just won't work with them. And to use the neurofeedback to uncover that beautiful child and young adult is really something amazing, but it doesn't always work out the way we hope.
This is true.
I wonder if you could talk about one of the things that seems challenging about particularly the sort of eager approach to doing neurofeedback, this combination of like understanding what is actually happening, what's the neurophysiology, what's the neurobiology, what's up with the brain, with all the different, with that, the actual, this is somewhat what Dr. Hamlin has really brought out for folks is this sort of understanding of the more neuroscience side of things. And then there's also the therapy. I wonder, can you talk a little bit about what that learning process was like for you? Did you find it challenging, or what did you find challenging?
It was awful. I went to the first NIC conference and I said, what the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. This is all over my head. I don't understand any of this. I need to go home right now. And I didn't.
Why
Listen,
not?
it's okay.
Well, I mean, why not? Well, was it that first one? I don't remember if it was that first. So my training trajectory was, so I did the intro course, and then I think I did the intermediate course that Ed was doing. And then I went to the NIC. And I think at the NIC was when all these people were talking about all this stuff, all this like neurology stuff. I was like, this is way beyond my capacity. And I think that was the first one where they started talking about default mode network. And it was also, so I had that piece, right? And then I also at the same time, there are lots of like, remember I said the moons and stars sort of align. So I had a new client who was a child, and the mom emailed me. She texted me and she said, there's this great book out. It's called Neurofeedback for the Treatment of Developmental Trauma, right?
Yeah,
and I was like, yeah. And I said, I know, I'm sitting next to the author.
Yeah. Best day ever.
It was. And she's like, no kidding. I'm like, uh-huh. And so, it was like,
Guess who your next mentor is going to be?
So that it was just funny that sort of happened. It was, like I said, just very fortuitous. And I was like, okay, so this means I'm supposed to be here. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with that, but it means I'm supposed to be here. So then I had another experience that, again, was very, sometimes I just have to look up at the sky and just say, I'm listening. And, so at that conference, I recently, like prior to that conference, my grandmother had a stroke and she lost a lot of her speech. And I was sitting next to 𝙲𝗏𝘏 in Rob Coben's course about coherence training. And so all of a sudden he's talking about, we can help stroke survivors or people with TBIs. And I was like, let me think about this. And so, after the course, I was then quickly going back to my room and calling my aunt who was taking care of my grandmother and saying, there's this thing, it's called neurofeedback. I am practicing it, but we can help. And we can help more. I think I may have started doing C3, C4, just sort of some stabilization training with her. But I was like, we can do this more intensely. And so that was actually my first introduction into the coherence model, working on my grandmother. I had a lot of experiences with her. I cut her when I used a red marker. I did not. Just so we're clear, I did not.
Good. Well, it seems like you found mentors who kind of helped you, sort of necessity is the mother of invention, and you found the mentors who kind of gave you the path. You just had to do the hard work to follow it.
Yeah, I guess. And when I didn't, sometimes they just appeared when I needed them, like the situation with Ed, and sometimes I had to seek them out. But yeah, I have been very lucky in that regard, and have benefited from amazing people, mentors and friends.
Do you find it hard to integrate the neurofeedback into therapy, or maybe hard but worthwhile, or easy? How's that How do you feel like that is for you?
I think it has gotten easier for me the more I have learned about the brain, right? So it was harder for me at first. And yet I still had clients that wanted to do it. I, they say never to, when I'm teaching EMDR, I tell people don't try this on your most difficult clients, but those were the clients that I was going to learn neurofeedback for. So they're the ones who got it. And there were benefits. So, and because they were, I guess most of them were kids and the parents were so desperate, they were willing to try just about anything. Yeah. Which is sad. And, but it's a fact of life.
Yeah.
So I ended up trying with a bunch of folks, and it just, as I was working with Ed, as I was learning more about the brain, and as I was learning more about how this is affecting stuff, and then also seeing how, as I was adding in neurofeedback, people's processing changed. All of a sudden they were able to talk about things, or that, like memories are more accessible to them, or, they were calmer, or they were, or, you know what? Sometimes they weren't. That was also a learning experience too. So, as I learned, I was able to talk more knowledgeably about the brain and talk more knowledgeably about, okay, this is what we're trying to do. It's not always a one size fits all. So we may have to tweak things and find your sweet spot, but we've had a lot of success with it. And I don't try to oversell it either. I also will tell folks, you know what? It doesn't work for everybody, but it's something we could try. And if you want to try it, great. If you don't, that's okay too. No skin off my back. And it kind of started to sell itself.
Yeah. It sounds like the more you saw its value, the more you saw how it changes how the brain works, the more you realized, if I do this, the other stuff works better. And there's a value here that makes it worth doing, even though it, takes away from some of the talk time and stuff like that.
Yes. And I guess typically I don't let it take away from the talk time. Most of the time, if folks do it, they have an hour session, and then they have, an add-on maybe.
Gotcha.
Neurofeedback time. So it ends up being like an hour and a half or something like that.
So then that helps, because I know you integrate EMDR with neurofeedback a lot, and I'd love to hear more about that, but then you have enough time for the EMDR, because EMDR in 60 minutes is usually a little squished for some folks. Well,
I have some thoughts about that, but this is not an EMDR podcast. No, with each of the clients, you have to figure out what they need. Some clients come in and they need the calming of the neurofeedback so that they can then go into an EMDR session, right? EMDR is going to help them make sense of their experiences, their world, maybe help them developmentally mature, whatever it is for that particular client. So some clients need it on the way in so that they can do whatever therapy. We're talking about EMDR, but it could be Santre, it could be DDP, it could be whatever. On the other hand, some clients, thinking of one in particular, really, it works better when we do the processing first, because sometimes the processing can be a bit activating. Okay, now we've asked you to talk about all these like horrible memories. Now I'm going to ask you to go home, and how well regulated will you be when you go home? So a lot of them, many, not all, but many actually work better when they're leaving the office. So they'll meet with me, we'll do our psychotherapy in whatever version we're doing. Typically it's EMDR because, in addition to neurofeedback, I can't imagine practicing without EMDR. But typically we'll do our session, and then then we'll do some neurofeedback training so that they can calm and regulate and sort of put away whatever it was that we had just been working on.
Yeah.
That seems like a nice fit. Some of the folks who, so I don't think I have any right now. I have had clients who come to me for just neurofeedback, but who are going to another therapist for whatever their psychotherapy is. And for those folks, at times, I will actually incorporate some of the bilateral stimulation from EMDR into their neurofeedback training. So while they're training, they can be holding tappers or, some version of that. And by doing that, it helps us to reduce some of the slow frequency, which they need anyway. So, so that's been pretty helpful. Doesn't really help with a lot of fast frequency stuff, but that part is
EMDR tappers. I'm gonna have to try that.
Again, I'm not saying anything works for everyone, just so we're clear.
Nothing ever works for everyone. That's just not the way
This
humans
is true.
work.
This is true.
And I do have to plug for Leigh that she is an EMDR trainer and a fantastic one at that. And we might be neurofeedback, but I very much, the way that Leigh teaches neurofeedback, especially if you work with developmental trauma, early life trauma, is really a phenomenal approach. And I can say strongly, if I was to go in that direction and do more EMDR, Leigh would be the way that I would go. So I'll plug that for you while you're on here with us.
Thank you, Leanne.
You
Much appreciated.
I'm learning to read cues instead, but otherwise I might go your direction.
I don't want to do that ever. You can do all that you want.
That is a beautiful thing about this world is, you find the direction that makes sense for you and your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. So, since you brought that up and you had asked that question previously, I don't need a lot of time. I can do a lot of processing in a short amount of time as long as I do the prep work beforehand. And I guess that's a big difference in the way that.
Yeah. And neurofeedback's part of that prep work, it sounds like.
It can be. It can be. Yeah. So
things that comes up for me is how different, for many of the clinicians that I talk to, it's like the starting point of the therapy and the neurofeedback and EMDR and whatever is really coming from a different place from this sort of medical model that I learned about, mental health or whatever, right? This idea that you go to a clinician and they will fix you, they'll treat you, they'll whatever. And there's this part of the way that many clinicians approach it, which is really about empowering the person to learn to self-regulate, to learn that kind of thing. I wonder if you could talk about how that shift is, how it's been for you. Were you instinctively just kind of drawn to this idea of like this, it's about empowering my clients to begin with? Or was that part of the sort of, transformation for you of as you've been doing neurofeedback?
I wasn't drawn to neurofeedback because I had this intrinsic draw. I was, like I said, I was pushed into neurofeedback under duress.
Pulled in kicking and screaming.
Yes.
But Mark's good at that. She's got Kate pulled in that way,
I know. Again, another person who has been very instrumental in, sort of my career trajectory. Anyway, so I think that, look, I only want to do things that have some sort of like, hey, this is really successful. This is a good model. This is a whatever. I'm not just sort of willy-nilly approaching types of therapy, right? On the other hand, I also have this like very kind of, I often refer to it as like the woo-woo side, like the metaphysical, the intuitive, the almost like a holistic kind of approach, right? So forever, I hate taking medication for anything. I hate, if I have to, I have to. That's, I'm not opposed to it necessarily, but if I can avoid it, I try to. And if there's a way for me to treat something without some sort of invasive kind of approach, then I always naturally do that. And I also think about my own children and what would I want to give them. So at one point, my oldest, one of the doctors said they think she had scoliosis. And so in that case, I was like, okay, researching. And then there's like some energy work that claims that they can, treat scoliosis. Turns out she doesn't have scoliosis. So we never needed to test that theory. But that was my, like, I wanted to find a way to help her that wasn't so invasive or painful for her. Right. And so, I sort of searched those things out. And I think when folks come to me, the ones that stay with me or the ones that want to work with me are ones that have a similar mindset. They don't want their kids on medication. They don't want to be on medication. They may be using medication because it's what they know to do because someone told them they had to or something like that. But they don't necessarily want that for themselves or for their children or their loved ones or whoever. And so it really has sort of worked out in that the ones who like this approach gravitate towards me. And so Lars, I don't know if that's answering your question, but
It is. Yeah. What I'm hearing is that you, that this is part. I mean, it's some of what I know about you as a person in the world is that you are just approaching it from the standpoint of how it's that old idea of like, first of all, don't do any harm. And then, if I can help a person to actually just by empowering them to kind of like learn some new things, then I'm going to do that first. If medication is necessary, obviously, then it's necessary. But yeah, that totally makes sense to me.
I also think that neurofeedback sometimes self rules out people who don't want to do the work themselves. In that you have to show up twice a week usually to really, once a week's okay, twice a week. It's work. You got to get there. We're not usually near where they live. Occasionally it lucks out that way, but often it's a commute. You got to show up. You got to bring the kid twice a week for a good period of time. And you've got to, in Leigh's case, if they're doing an hour and a half, that's committing a good amount of funds to the process. So I think self-selectively, the people who come in our door and stay around are ones who want to work hard. And if on our side, we can empower them that they're regulating their brain through neurofeedback, I'm just giving them the feedback. And EMDR is very much the same way. You're providing the mode of reprocessing, but what's happening in their head is the work they're doing. They work really nicely hand in hand. Usually I find the ones that neurofeedback doesn't work well for are sometimes the ones who there's a lot of reasons they can't change their environment, their world. They're not ready for it. Not always, but that can be the case. So my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I am sort of reflecting on it. Had a thought that I wanted to add in there too. It's gone now though. So.
Maybe it'll crop back up.
Yeah. At some point.
Lars, you seem to have a thought too as I jumped in.
No, I mean, I was just kind of, it's actually on a totally different track. It occurred to me that some people that may be looking at our discussions would be curious, like, how does this all fit in with, I have a career as a mental health professional. How is that going to change when I'm doing? Do you feel like there has been a shift in the way that you approach, like, your career or your business as a therapy professional? What would you say about that? Like, if somebody were approaching you strictly for, we talked to Chris Wheeler-Doe, who said, I had a successful business already. So this was like, I didn't really need to go in and do neurofeedback. It was this whole other thing. And so it became we were talking about how you were really pushed into checking out neurofeedback as a thing. How does that all fit in, I guess, for you? Like maybe from your experience with talking to mentees, like what are some of the questions that come up for them? I'm curious about, with respect to like, what does this mean for me to be somebody who is really a guide? That's what y'all are, it seems to me, is a guide for folks who are really looking for solutions to, I don't know what to do with my life because I feel stuck. So they come to you all and they're asking for some guidance about that kind of stuff, and neurofeedback being one of the tools. I don't know if I'm capturing it at all.
I think my answer to that question would be, right from the beginning, the name of my practice is Center for Dynamic Growth. And I agonized and agonized and agonized and agonized over what was I going to name this, right? Like what could be the title? And the reason, and part of why I was agonizing over it was because what I believe is that there is not any one model of therapy that works for every person. And sometimes it's not even mental health therapy that people need. Sometimes they need occupational therapy. Sometimes they need speech therapy. Sometimes, whatever. There's other components, right? So initially, when I was creating my business, the idea was that I wanted to have a place that would represent having lots of modalities under the same roof. And essentially what the goal in that is to be able to say, okay, these are all the tools in my toolbox, and you're coming in and you're presenting this way. And if I pick and choose the right tools, then I will help you to succeed in whatever your goal is here. And I think neurofeedback for me, even though, like I said, I was pushed into it, but I think that just became another tool in my toolbox that I'm able to sort of mix and match with certain folks to help them either enhance their treatment, or it could be their only treatment. It all depends on the person, but it becomes more of a, I don't know if eclectic approach. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Integrative.
yeah, thank you. Integrative approach versus just saying, okay, if you only come in, we're only going to do EMDR. That feels sort of disingenuous to me. So that was so I think that neurofeedback was never, it just sort of fit in with my philosophy of being in business as well as a human, I guess. Like I tend to, I can't draw or paint, but this is my creativity, I guess, is looking at a situation and then being able to say, okay, if we do this, this, and this might.
That's
And
great.
it's always
I love that. I love that. What I'm hearing is that it's all really, in some way for you, it's about the flexibility of like, okay, in this case, it looks like this thing could work, and being able to kind of say, okay, well, we'll try this thing, we'll see how that goes. We'll try this thing, we'll see how that goes, and so on. And that's I love how you call that a creative process, because that, I think, it really, it illuminates it in an important way.
Yeah. And what's also beautiful about that, that I think works well, is in an attachment model, they build a relationship with a person, and the more tools that person has, the more they can not have to refer out. It's one of the challenges that we have, and why I screen very carefully to take in clients, because we don't have that kind of offering. Eventually, I hope to have more clinicians with more, things. But it means that once somebody starts, if you don't have it, it's very hard. They don't want to go somewhere else to get it. They want to stay with the person they know and trust and have that relationship with. And it gets hard because you're like, hey, I think you need the EMDR. And I'm like, but I don't do that. Here, go see this person. And that referral can be really hard to get them to do it. So I think it's a beautiful attachment perspective too, to keep it, to have as many tools as possible for them right in house.
I think you also bring up another point that I think was very important for me is, everything that I did in my office, whether it be in the neurofeedback room or in the waiting room or wherever, I picked paint colors that were calming and soothing. I make sure that the hand soap in the bathrooms have no scent. Like, I try to make it so that it's as calming to everyone that walks through the door, but also that's inviting. I know for a long time, I can't now. It has gotten a little bit too big, but and I'm not complaining about that. But for a long time, even if the client wasn't mine, I knew them. Like, I could see them in the waiting room and be like, "Oh, hi," whoever,
Yeah. I still do all the intakes for my entire practice, so I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I
You can only
think,
maintain that for so long.
right. And I think that part of that is about building the relationship. So in whatever model of therapy, and neurofeedback is not, even though it seems like it's more of a medical model, even though it might seem that way, the relationship is still key. Like, it is still key. And so I think that just having that like warmth and that approachableness and that environment, I think, is important, again, regardless of what model of therapy that you practice, but certainly included in neurofeedback as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one last question for you. Not that we have to stop right away, but I wanted to ask, like, if you've been doing this for a little while, for folks who are just getting started, I wonder if you could offer some guidance. What would your suggestions be for somebody who's starting out wanting to become a neurofeedback clinician?
Keep going to courses, even though it feels like it's over your head. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Each time you attend one, you're going to take away something else, and each little bit that you take away will build on itself. So that would be takeaway one, or at least that's what worked for me. And then the other piece is get a mentor that you respect on a lot of different levels. Ed knew all of the different therapy models that I practiced. It wasn't just that he knew neurofeedback. He knew my clients, my type of clients that I had coming through the doors. And he also knew EMDR. He knew play therapy. He knew those things. So he was very astute. Ed is always very astute. So to say that, it seems weird, but he was always very helpful in helping me to figure out, like, okay, if we do this and then we do this, or I saw this in the play, does that mean the neurofeedback worked? And he was able to say, yeah, I think it is, or no, that's not connected, or, whatever. So I would say, keep going to courses, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And just keep listening, like hearing it. And you're going to have to hear something about 20,000 times before it really starts to be like, oh, right, duh. Like it will sort of click at some point. But it's the repetition that I think is key there. And then the mentor. Have somebody that you have a good relationship with, that you can have a good relationship with, and that you can, rely on, that knows your client. And I'm just repeating myself, but you get the idea.
Leigh, I think one of the themes that I've heard from you throughout today, even embedded in the name of your company, is growth. And I hear a repeated theme about, whatever the modality, but especially in neurofeedback, you will keep growing. And it's to seek those opportunities out. It's to find the people that you can grow with and point you in the right direction. And that love of learning, I think, is really important to you, but I also think in the field in general.
Yeah.
Our world of therapy and helping people is just going to continue to evolve from here. So if we want to do right by our clients, we just have to continue to learn all the time.
We need to continue to learn, and things are changing in the world of the brain, or in the world of neuroscience. Like, things are changing so rapidly right now. So, what yesterday is not going to be what, factual tomorrow. So stay abreast of that. Keep on top of that. Um,
And it's hard when we're in a mental health crisis and we're never paid enough in this field, but you do your best.
or we don't have enough time. Like,
Well, we could have more time if our hours were paid better. If insurance reimbursement rates paid therapists better, they'd have more time. They wouldn't have to see so many clients in a day and burn out. That's a different discussion.
mm,
But yeah, it's tough. It's tough to stay on top of everything that changes. But I hopefully that means
and you don't have to. I was going to say, but it doesn't mean that you have to be reading research every day. Like I don't think that that's what it means. It doesn't mean that to me, although maybe I should be reading more research every day. But
I just turn into Anna. She reads 3 a day.
I know she got that from Ed. So I
Such a
know
good student.
I'm not. Anyway, so but you know, okay, so you don't have the time for that. I have all sorts of blurbs on Instagram from 𝘶𝗿𝗄𝗏, from Dan Siegel, from, all of these amazing, and one I was listening to this morning was from Esther Perel. Like, there's all these amazing people out there who have a lot of information to share on a lot of different topics. And so even if you hear a 10-second blurb from them or a minute, whatever, I don't even know what they're called because I'm so stupid when it comes to that stuff. But, oh yeah, that. Even if you just listen to that, find the people that are well respected in the field, and listen to some of the things that they have to say. And that even just that little bit will help too. It's not everything that you need. I'm not trying to, please don't think I'm misleading or feel misled by that. It's not everything that you need, but even if you keep up with some of that a little bit, that will help. And all of a sudden you'll have, oh, right. Like, 𝘶𝗿𝗏𝗏 said something about 80% of military, veteran, folks, military personnel who have come out of military with PTSD, 80% of them have had developmental trauma. That's a pretty significant statement. So,
surprising, but significant to see it.
Right. So, I don't know where he got that. I can't quote it, but I know I saw the reel. So, so
They cited it in the caption somewhere.
I don't, but either way, look for opportunities to read and to hear and to just sort of be absorbed in the community. And there are some communities where it is more exclusive than other communities. However, I do feel like our community has always been very warm and inviting. Even when I, felt like a fish out of water and like I don't belong here. These people are all so much smarter than me. Even when that happened, I still like it, it was still very warm and embracing. And so I fell into the fold. Here I am.
That is one of the beautiful parts of the eager community. I had the same experience. I was like, what am I doing here? These people are brilliant. And I'm sitting next to Seaburn, and Mike Cohen, who's written books and all this stuff. And they're like, you're just a human and I'm a human and we all deserve to be here. We're trying to help people. Same goal. Welcome to the community.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing. Nobody's above anybody else.
Yeah. So keep going, keep staying, keep attending, keep showing up.
I wonder if I could ask you a random, different question, which is,
you said you were asking the last question.
I did. I'm totally going back on my word. Have you used any other neurofeedback softwares besides Eager?
Yeah, I know the answer.
Oh, do you?
I guess.
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I guess the question is really why is I'm guessing that you use at least mostly Eager, maybe only Eager for neurofeedback, and I wonder if you could just talk about why Eager.
So I use Eager for training, and everybody that I train on Eager. I do have a Brainmaster system that I use for data collection for cues.
We have to use something for that. So
So I do use that. To be fair, I did try to use that for training at one point, but everything in that system was like an add-on. I don't want to bash another company, but it just, everything was an add-on. And so what I thought was a system that I could use to train, I couldn't really use to train. And then it didn't feel as maybe user-friendly to me. And with 𝙏𝑝𝑔, I feel like you just sort of go from left to right. Like you go here, and then next you go here, and then next you go here. I've yet to figure out really the home use system process as well as I probably should, although I only have one person doing home use, so there's that. Leanne is much more adept at that.
we can trade. I could use some more mini map help.
Okay, we'll do that. So, yeah, it just is. It seems to me to be more user friendly. It seems to be sort of more natural, and really the thing that hooked me in from the start with 𝙏𝑝𝑔 was the fact that it was the only system, and I don't know if that's changed at this point, but it was the only system that was ever used in like the research studies, the bigger neurofeedback research studies, because it had capabilities to capture data that you might need in research.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, Leigh, before we go, do you want to plug any of your company, social media, trainings, whatever have you?
No. Just kidding. I don't, right now, I am just coming off of a very busy January, February, March, April. What month are we in? God, the last couple weeks, it was sort of crazy. I do teach for EMDR consulting, and I had a course that I was going to do in Grand Cayman at the end of this month, but I didn't advertise it. So what I would like to plug is that there's going to be an EMDR course coming up in Grand Cayman, hopefully in the fall. It's going to be rescheduled for the fall. So it'll be sort of like a retreat training. We could do processing on the beach. Who wouldn't want that?
Where can they find that info? Or like, is it your website or is it the consulting website?
You'd go to emdrconsulting.com and it'll be up there. As soon as I get the dates planned out, but it'll be sometime in the fall, hopefully after hurricane season.
Good idea.
Yeah. And then, well, anyway, that's maybe an offline conversation, but, and there hopefully will be more courses coming up, both in EMDR. I actually, what the thought was, Lars, I'm thinking about possibly regenerating an old course that we had sort of put together.
Oh yeah.
So maybe we can do that. And then I'm also putting together some advanced EMDR courses, which one is on play in EMDR. One is on actually energy work in EMDR. And then the other one will be pre-verbal trauma. So I do a lot of pre-verbal trauma processing.
And Leigh's also a mentor for our practicum when she can fit it in.
Yeah.
The 𝙏𝑝𝑔 introduction to neurofeedback. She mentors the practicum, the hands-on stuff.
Yeah.
When we can steal her.
I love doing that. I love doing that. The attendees have been pretty great.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much, Leigh, for doing this today.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.